All right. Hey, Graham. Welcome back, man.
Hey, how's it going?
Going good. What's up, everyone in the chat? Hopping
Day.
in. Happy Tuesday. Almost hump day. We're here. If you're watching on, LinkedIn or Twitter, share in the chat where you're tuning in from. I'm eager to hear where our listeners and just folks who are attending chatting with us today are residing. So if you hopped in, let us know in the chat where you're hanging and coming in from, and we'd love to hear from you. But today, kicking it off, it's been an interesting week in Bitcoin and Lightning. I feel like there's been a lot of hype around the ETF. We're seeing the buying slow down a little bit on a net 30-day window. Mark Moss was talking about that a little earlier today, posting a chart. So today, we're going to dive into some specific tech that's being built, and I'm going to start us off here by sharing what Super Testnet had done last week. We had brought up discussing this, and um, what he had worked on is a protocol called Hedgehog. He had mentioned it was creating a way for asynchronous two-layer payments. Some folks down in the comments on Stacker News, if you're on Stacker News, they always dive into the nitty-gritty. They were saying it's maybe not that, but Graham, could you maybe shed some light on Hedgehog for us and what protocols like this do for Bitcoin?
Yeah, I mean it's we hinted at it at like the final minute of our show last week because I think that Super Testnet dropped it like 10 minutes before our show or something. So now it's been out for a little while, had a lot of kind of review comments, those kinds of things. It seems interesting, and I think the impetus of what he's kind of trying to do here is make it a little bit more asynchronous and like maybe starting there. The Lightning Network is very synchronous from a payments perspective, as terms of like when you send a payment, the other person has to be online to kind of produce some new signatures to like resolve the payment, decrypt the onion packets, all those things. So by nature, the Lightning Network is a very synchronous payment mechanism, meaning both sides have to be online to complete a payment. What this is trying to do is make it a little bit more asynchronous, so not everyone has to be online all the time to facilitate the payments. It seemed like from I think Roast Beef said something on Twitter on like this kind of had been like invented already or discovered already like years ago, I think, as part of like the Lightning Network design, and was kind of like intentionally there's some trade-offs I think associated with it that kind of like ultimately they didn't go with that path. So Super Testnet was like very good, and like he was just kind of like, okay, I didn't discover this, I'm only like a rediscoverer. He kind of like rediscovered this new island or something. But like I think that it's cool to see folks like Super Testnet that he's been working on BitVM and all of these different things, really trying to just like push the envelope of like what can we do with these kinds of protocols, what can we do with like what's possible in Bitcoin today. I think that that's like one of the big differences between some of this kind of research versus there's a lot of people that are researching things that are kind of like further down the road. Once we get some soft forks or things like that into Bitcoin, then this thing will be possible. What's really cool about this is they're very focused on what can we do today, what can we add, what can we build on top of the protocol as it exists today with no soft forks or anything like that. So it's really great to see things like this. I think that for Hedgehog specifically, it seems kind of cool. I don't know if it's as groundbreaking as we kind of like thought initially, but I think that the push for async inside of these kinds of payments and protocols, I think, is very important. I think that that's one of the really great things that is awesome about Bitcoin layer one is the asynchronousness of it. You can just have an address, you can kind of post the address and just completely forget about it, walk away. So I think that that's the payment experience that a lot of people desire. So pushing for that, I think, makes a lot of sense, and we should definitely continue to push for that. And there's kind of a lot that we can dive into on like what is asynchronous, what is like versus kind of like a delayed finalization, all of these things, but maybe we won't go there just yet. But I think it's great to see this kind of development happening, even if it's maybe not quite what we originally imagined. Cool to see this kind of development happening.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. Thanks for the breakdown. And he shared some stuff down here. Like folks were asking questions. Is it trustless? He said, no, I don't believe it's. I don't believe in trustlessness, but majority of miners are honest. He gave his answer. Do you know LSP? No. Um, is it too good to
Mm-hmm.
be true? Where trade offs? People need inbound liquidity, routed payments require routing nodes, and they're not completed until they do eventually come online. So some trade-offs, but like you said, like the fact that he's constantly pushing the envelope and exploring new things and giving people these ideas and starting points on where to explore, it's a net good. So good job.
Right. I think that's the big takeaway here is just really like, we need more experimentation. What can happen, and I think that's one of the great things about what Super Testnet does is, I mean, he kind of like creates this proof of concept, publishes it, and then says, hey, like what do you think? What are people? Does this make sense? Is it good? Is it bad? Like all those kinds of things, and kind of like maybe lets a lot of like community dialogue happen on top of like his ideas. So I think that's great to see it. That kind of collaboration between like someone that's tinkering and playing around, and then the broader community.
Super Testnet creates community. We can say that.
Yeah, yeah.
So this was interesting because this has been a topic I feel I've heard a lot recently. Craig Raw, he was just discussing at a conversation recently just about, are we giving up decentralization, privacy, expecting no permissions and not having to trust third parties. And there was a podcast Peter McCormick did this week that was by Bitcoin Mechanic, who works with Ocean Mining, and it really made an impact on me because he was just talking about, the people across the world who use Bitcoin and need it. They don't care about these cat inscriptions and JPEGs. They want sound money. And when it comes to sovereign money, it takes defending it. And for me in particular, whenever I think about that, I'm like, yeah, I totally agree. And he put out a really good case. And Craig Raw talking about this, focusing on scaling. Like one thing that's happened in the short term is with this, pump and increase in ordinals and NFTs. There's been this discussion of, we got to fix miner incentives. We have to reward miners more. If we don't, they're going to go away and Bitcoin won't be as resilient in the future. And there's other potential shortcuts that are being made that reduce privacy, increase centralization, and so on. But I'd love to hear your take on this, because I know at Voltage we're doing what we feel is the right way about going about building technology for companies that are integrating in Bitcoin and Lightning. So what are your two sats on this topic?
Yeah, I mean, one, I think Craig has like a great point, and I think that I think he's got a lot of good points in this, and like everyone should like watch like kind of this video is like what 4 or 5 minutes long. I think it's kind of worth watching just to get his take on it, and then there's like the full video down below. So I think that he definitely has a point, because I think that as we look at there's like when we think about, okay, the way that people are talking about scaling Bitcoin today, it's all in these like layer twos or things that are on top of Bitcoin from like, not necessarily inside. So in, previously in kind of like the big block era, the way that people talked about scaling Bitcoin was increasing like block size and things like that. So very, I would say affecting the layer one in a very kind of drastic way, where now a lot of the ways that people are talking about scaling Bitcoin is inside of like layer twos, like Lightning Network, Fedi mints, like all of these different kinds of technologies. And so we're talking about scaling in a much different way than we have previously. So I think that that's good. But I think that, to his point, you think about, okay, if like is Fedi mint a way of scaling Bitcoin, there's you can debate like that sentence alone for a while, but like inside of like Fedi mints are like they're inherently more centralized and more permissioned. They are less trustless, like all of these different things. And so you kind of give up some of the underlying properties of Bitcoin when you move into those. Same thing with Lightning to an extent. It depends on how you use it, whether you use, fully custodial solution, fully non-custodial solution, like how do you kind of interact with them, all these different things. So you naturally, I think you do lose some of the properties of Bitcoin as you go into these further layers. That being said, I do think that there's also there's also it's kind of like those are all optional solutions where you don't have, you aren't forced to use Fedi, you aren't forced to use Lightning, you aren't forced to use any of those things. You can still use Bitcoin layer one today. There's arguments as, okay, if everyone in the world starts using Bitcoin, well, then it becomes like cost advantageous for someone to, you couldn't own your UTXOs, you couldn't transact because the fees are so high. So like I think that there's points there, but I think in today's world, there's definitely like those kinds of systems are optional. So you still have the, if you want to use it in this completely decentralized, super permissionless, all of these kinds of ways, you still completely have that optionality today. And then looking at, as we look to the future and, okay, how do we scale? I think that, scaling can look a lot of different ways depending on where you're at in the world and what your opportunities are, and then also inside of like, what kind of solutions do you use. So I agree with him that there's like, if, and that's kind of what we said, I've said for a while, is like, if the whole way that everyone uses Lightning across the world is like 100% custodial all the time, then like, well, then we failed as like kind of Bitcoiners, because then we just remade banks, like, in a way, it's just like there's nothing new here. And so I think that that's kind of his point, is like, if we continue to push in the scaling, the ways that we think about scaling in a completely in a way that's mimicking the traditional financial system, well, then like, then what are we doing? We completely failed. So I think that there's I think overall, it's very, very hard to like actually scale this stuff in a way that maintains all of those layer one properties. But it's just because it's hard doesn't mean it's an endeavor that shouldn't be undertaken. Like, we should definitely still be pushing in that way and going for scaling everything in a way that preserves all of the properties of Bitcoin. So I think that and I think that goes back to things like like super testnet, doing like these kinds of experiments and things like that. I think that that's kind of the stuff that we need to be focused on, and doing it in a way that is as trust minimized and permissionless and all these things as possibly can. And I think the final thing I'll say here is that everything is a spectrum of like, you can like the one of the spectrum is fully custodial. You never have your own UTXO. You never have any of your own stuff at all. It's all an IOU, versus, the other side of the spectrum is like, you have like a signing device that's never been online ever. You own your UTXOs, all of those things. Then anything in the middle, it's just a matter of where do you want to sit as far as like that trust spectrum goes, and the permissionless and all of those things. So I think that I don't think that there's going to always be this kind of, we're never always going to sit on the far end of like everyone owning their own UTXOs all the time. There's going to be people that live outside of that. So it's kind of like, it's kind of what makes sense for a particular individual across the world, because there's no one size fits all for any of this stuff. So that was a bit of a rant, but like, that's kind of, I guess, my take on it.
No, that's good. I mean, and I agree with you 100%. Like, it does live on a spectrum, and there's going to be those who run their own nodes, spin up and build their own hardware, or those who use a trusted solution, and there's everyone in between. And call me. I'm always guilty of like having this vision of the future that's going to happen, and then when you explain it to someone, all the builders are like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! Pump the brakes, man! That's not going to be possible. Like, that's not a thing." But I have this vision of the future where code is it's complex, but it's simple, and like how AI tools can help people write and script their own code. If open source stays open source and not we don't call open viewable or open source viewable like the thing where people gravitate to, like Craig was talking to. If it's open source viewable and these specialized AIs can crawl the web and scrape open source software, there's going to be the ability to craft front end experiences and to create wallets and running mobile nodes in the future with a couple of clicks, I would imagine. It's very early for that, but I could totally see people being able to do that. And we're talking about like the next generation of kids who are going to be natively doing this, and it's not going to be foreign to them. My dad's not going to do it, but I totally see that being possible. There's a ton of things that need to be done along the way. So, the swing to centralization, the swing back to decentralization while it's happening in the brick and mortar world, if you will, like in meat space, it's going to happen digitally too. So I think you raise a lot of good points there.
Yeah. And I think it's just like, I think the biggest thing that we should be doing as Bitcoiners, in my opinion, is just building tools for different parts, for different segments of users. That there's some people like, like my parents are like probably going to use a custodial solution. I just kind of bought my dad like, a hardware wallet to like get things off of Coinbase and stuff like that. So like, he's interested in that, but like there's a lot of those folks that are just not going to do it. And so, they're going to use custodial solutions, and as much as we scream about it, it's probably not going to change. So we, like, there's solutions for them, and maybe like Fedimint is a better solution than Coinbase. So like that's great for them. But we also need to build things for the people that like are actually oppressed by governments, and they need something to be able to feed their family at like at night. So we need to build for both. We can't just build for one or the other. It's got to be solving for everyone, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, that's a good word. So this is something that's also popped on crazy online this week is Facebook lets Netflix see user DMs. And you see the headlines and everyone just kind of saying the headline. It's like, wow, this isn't great. What about our data? But someone from Facebook specifically was saying that you would need to log into the Facebook app with your Facebook account to grant access to the chat functionality. So this is standard permission sharing, and this is like one of the quote unquote um, weaknesses or vulnerabilities, whatever you want to call it, about using like Google login or Facebook login and not logging in with your email is you're allowing these apps that know everything about you to share and consolidate data, and there's been a lot over the last like 5 to 7 years challenges marketers face over not having access to data that impacts cost per acquisition. And like Facebook's messaging information has been around since 2018 here. So this isn't new, but it kind of just brings to the forefront in my mind Noster, the ability for people to kind of control their identity and have a bit more privacy with services. I mean, I'm curious about your thoughts on this broadly, in the world of people's data, but also like where do you see Noster impacting this over the next decade? And are you a Noster bull?
Yeah, I mean, like, I enjoy Nostr. I think that it's great. I think that whether Nostr is the thing or not, like, I think that that's maybe the bigger point here is just around like you don't own your data, not at all, like especially when you use these platforms that the centralized parties, any of these social media platforms, any of those things, like you don't own your data. And I don't know all the details about this specific occurrence, but I can't imagine that inside of like the Facebook app or anything, it's like a button to like share your data with Netflix. I'm sure it was like a little bit more behind the scenes than that, but like even if it was like sort of this sort of opt-in thing, I highly doubt that they're like completely stating what they're doing with it. And I think that that's the case across the board. Is they're they have complete control over everything that kind of goes on there, even when you think it's like, oh, it's my private messages or something. Well, it's not private unless it's like actually end-to-end encrypted and all of these things. Like that's where Nostr really comes in, is even in relays and all those things, everything's encrypted all the time. So I think that encryption is the thing that really saves us in this context. And being able to actually do end-to-end encryption on all of your messages, and then not even sharing data with parties like that as much as you can too. So I think that it does. I think it's just another. It's kind of one of those things. It feels like a drop in the bucket, like in terms of like this isn't the first time people like a big party has abused data that they've had. It's not going to be the last, and so it's like, does it make a big difference to like the people out there, like Facebook users? I don't know how many Facebook users there are today, but it's a lot. And so does it make sense where people are going to start canceling? I don't know. I mean, is this going to make a difference for those people to actually go and seek out these new tools to actually change their behaviors?
Yeah, there was like 90 million AT&T customers' data was leaked last week onto the dark web, and I was one of those. And I kind of had an eye roll moment because you're right. It's a drop in the bucket, because it's like we're kind of, there's no hope for like protecting data at this point. It's a matter of like play reactive, protective recovery, if you will. But yeah, no, that's spot on.
Yeah, it's like we're all numb to it at this point of like data breaches and people intentionally, sharing your data with other people. It's just like I feel like it's something that we see weekly at least. And so I think that a lot of people just kind of get numb to it. And it's like one of those things where it's I think for like AT&T and stuff is like very challenging, because like there's how many cell phone providers or cellular providers out there. There's not many, and so you don't have a lot of opportunity in choosing. And even then, it's like you can't run your cell phone over Nostr. Maybe one day, but like until then, you're kind of you're forced into those kinds of systems. At least with Facebook, you do have the ability to opt out. You don't have to use platforms like that. So yeah. I think that it'll be interesting to see. It's kind of like. And maybe maybe the reason why it's not a bigger kind of exodus from these kinds of tools is maybe things like Nostr or like better alternatives aren't built out well enough quite yet for like the general public or something like that. So maybe that's kind of one of the reasons, which is an incentive to go and kind of build better experiences on top of it. But it'll be interesting to see. Like, it's kind of like my question is like, when is enough is enough? When do people hit that moment where they're like, you know what, I'm going to exit this system and do something else?
That's a good question. And speaking of opposite ends of spectrum, Mutiny has a Noster-based profile set up. It may not be on
Yeah.
Facebook yet, but Mutiny announced this today. Pretty sweet stuff. A redesigned home screen, Noster-based profile setup, and Fediment integration. It's here. Graham, I'm personally not too privy to like using Fediments. I've like follow their social and everything, but what does this like initially just mean for users?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a great segue in that it does it enables a lot of the things that we were kind of like talking about in a couple of previous topics. But this is a great release. It's really revamped kind of the way that you use Mutiny. I don't think that I've actually tried it out yet, but I've seen like the screenshots and stuff. But it looks really really nice, and it kind of makes it a little bit more kind of ingraining a little more of the social aspects or kind of connecting the Noster of like contacts and things like that you would get in like a Cash App experience or something like that, but doing it in this completely non-custodial Lightning way. So like that's really awesome. And then also the Fediment integrations of it seems like adding Federation Discovery. So it's not like previously if you wanted to use like Fediment with Mutiny Wallet, you had to like be a part of a federation or know the connection strings and things like that, and like paste them into your settings. Where now it's like, hey, here's a list of federations. I don't know if they're probably like global federations or something like that, and you can select one and like join it from there. And so it's kind of it increases the discoverability of the federations that are out there, and then you can actually kind of participate in them a little bit easier than like, I mean, because before that it's kind of like the early Lightning days where people, when they were trying to open channels to it, like the number one way of like getting a channel partner was like either Telegram or like Twitter of like, hey, who wants to open a channel with me? Is the same thing with like federations of being able to like, hey, you have to know the federation to be able to join it, where this seems like it has a discoverability aspect to it, which is really nice to kind of increase the adoption of Fediments. No, Bobby, you're muted. I don't know if I.
Oh yeah, sorry about
You're
that.
good. You're
Yeah,
good.
moving on to our next topic here, the BIP editors. It sounds like TLDR, maybe Luke Dash Jr. has been busy. A couple of folks are proposing, hey, maybe we add a couple of other editors. Some folks threw their name in the hat. Some of folks were recommended were like highly technical, like very smart people. And from my takeaway, Matt Crollo and others were just saying, hey, these guys assign numbers and they kind of proof. They're not the arbiters of decision making. Maybe we don't have roast beef in charge of this. He has better stuff to do. I mean, there's been a little animosity on Twitter, if you will, like some folks responding to this negatively. But what are your general thoughts about adding editors to the bit process? What does this generally mean for the average maybe Bitcoin user or business who's considering Bitcoin?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is like the whole impetus of this is like basically we've had kind of a falling out in terms of people being able to review BIP. So a BIP is a Bitcoin improvement proposal, and that basically it's like, hey, I have an idea on something that could be better in Bitcoin, whether it's protocol related or something else, and so you submit like kind of a PR into the BIP repository to say, hey, here's my idea, and then the community can discuss it and say, hey, this is flawed in these ways, or we should do this instead, or something like that. And so that's what BIP, the BIP process kind of is. I mean, very, very high level. And then, so Luke Dasher has been kind of the sole reviewer, or like I would almost even say like triage of like, when a BIP comes in, you need to like assign it a number, you need to do just some basic sanity checks on it. And, he obviously, I mean, he's busy. Everyone is just kind of busy in general, and then he got more involved with Ocean and kind of started that project. So I imagine he's pretty thin on time, and so the whole kind of the conversation has been, okay, we need to get more people involved in the BIP process, and there should never be kind of a single person doing anything basically in Bitcoin like ever. We need to have like redundancies in all places, and so there's basically a call of like, hey, who wants to participate and help? Some people either volunteered or got volunteered for them. And then I think that the whole process kind of exploded in terms of like, well, can these people like censor what proposals are being put forward, or can they make decisions on what gets approved and not? And I think that really did kind of get blown up from what I've seen in terms of like the whole impetus here is just like we need people to just kind of like do the first sanity check and like assign numbers and just kind of like get it in order, and then the community talks about it and then implements it or does whatever from there. So I think that's what this is looking for, is just kind of like this triage spot for the Bitcoin proposals. But I think that some people maybe, I don't know if it was they didn't like the people that were volunteered or if they thought the process should be different or what. I think that honestly, people have a lot of thoughts and opinions about Luke, but I think that he's kind of been very level headed of like, he's trying to focus on just like, look, we just need more people to do this kind of initial triage. And then like, if you have problems with like the process of how do we do BIPs or anything like that, like great, like submit a proposal of like how to do it differently or whatever, like do it in a different spot. We are exclusively focused on how do we get some more people involved in this. So we aren't like, so Bitcoin isn't completely frozen in terms of like, getting new ideas in. So maybe there's more to the story there, but that kind of like seems like what it is from my perspective. And so I think it's great to have more people. We obviously need more people than just one person doing kind of like these kinds of reviews and triage and whatnot.
Yeah. Good point. Interesting. Well, we're getting close to the end here, guys. And I had one final point I wanted to share with y'all. The government is using Bitcoin. The government has transferred $2 billion worth of Bitcoin today. So
That's awesome.
It's happening. Yeah.
That is awesome. And it's, so what is it? That's like about $2 billion for $1.50. Is that right? Yeah. So I love seeing those transactions because it's like, it just speaks volumes to like kind of what what Bitcoin is made for. Maybe it's not not made exclusively for fees, but like I mean to be able to move like $2 billion in TradFi is like I don't even know what the fee on that would be, but you can't do it as quickly or as cheaply. So I love seeing transactions like that, and the fact that it's from the government is like that's icing on the cake.
Yeah, they clearly understand fees, and they might be looking at the mempool, and they're using Bitcoin today. They paid a miner, and the question is, are they using illicit funds per the government's definition? I would say so. So no, I'm kidding. But guys, we appreciate y'all tuning in. We'll be back next week. Graham, I appreciate your time, and we've got a lot of really fun stuff coming down the pipe over the next month, just in regards to the user experience. So if you're not following Voltage currently, you can find us on X and LinkedIn, and we're excited to share some of the new stuff that we're building in the coming months. So appreciate your time, Graham.